Velma. Hey, Arliss, what you doing? Just listening to what? Everybody doing what? Just talking. I talk, you talk, he talks, she talks, we talk, they talk. Everybody here talks. Every day. Nobody listening. Conversation. We want you to watch our stations. We'll exceed your expectation every day. Conversation with Velma and Arliss.
Hello, and welcome to Everyday Conversations with Velma and Arliss. My name is Velma Jackson-Wilkins, and today my guest is Sekou Writes. Sekou has a very interesting background. He is an author, journalist, automotive blogger, filmmaker, jewelry maker, influencer, and shutterbug. He holds a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and Fiction from New School University and a Bachelor's of Arts from Morehouse College. He has written for numerous magazines and websites and is currently the founder and editor-in-chief of SimplyRides.com, an online car magazine geared toward affluent multicultural women. Welcome. I'm glad to have you back again today.
Thanks for having me back.
Yes,
it's
great.
To be back.
So what I want to do is get started the same way as before.
Okay.
I want to just talk about how did you get into journalism?
So I started writing pretty early in grade school, and later I decided, it was decided for me. I was you mentioned Morehouse. I was a political science major at Morehouse, and I was applying to graduate school, and I realized that all of my extracurricular activities were writing related, and that's when I realized that I wanted to be a writer. So I finished that degree, but I came to New York to become a writer, and I got my MFA in creative writing, and that's how I kind of transitioned from political science into being an author/journalist.
Terrific. Now, I know you've been doing a lot of work in the magazine space, and you've written articles for a lot of them. Tell us some of the magazines and some of the articles that you've written.
Wow. Well, I was on staff at Uptown Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I was not only the first full-time employee, but the founding managing editor. I ended my career there as the editor-in-chief of the website. I was at Uptown for about 5 years, so the bulk of my magazine work is at Uptown. But I've also written for Essence and Ebony, lots of magazines. In terms of what I've written about, it's covered the gamut. I am a lifestyle journalist primarily, but Uptown is a celebrity-driven magazine, so I did lots of celebrity interviews in the beginning. My favorite cover story was Terrence Howard. I met him in person at his hotel in LA, and that was quite the experience. So that was my favorite cover story.
And that was for Uptown or Essence?
That was for Uptown, yeah.
And how do you keep the stories fresh? By having new people, or how?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of having new people, and also a little bit of keeping yourself fresh, like trying to find a new angle. At the time when I interviewed Terrence Howard, he was just coming off of Hustle and Flow, which was a huge movie for him. And so there were lots of magazines that were trying to keep him in that kind of gangster hood vibe.
Yes.
And so my choice was to take a different direction and talk about the fact that he's a mathematician, that he's seems to be a genius outside of acting, and to talk about those things that maybe people don't know so much. So you try to keep it fresh for you, and then it becomes fresh for the reader in turn.
Okay, great. Right.
Yeah.
What about in the editorial space? I know you've written fiction and
Yes.
you've written nonfiction. Let's talk about the two fiction books you've written.
Okay.
When Butterflies Kiss. When I read a little bit about that, I said, oh my God, this is so romantic. Tell us what When Butterflies Kiss is all about and how it got started.
Okay, so I'll tell you what the title means first, because
Okay.
actually the title did not precede the book, it came after. So the title means this is what happens when butterflies or creative spirits or writers come together or collaborate or kiss. So the book was what's called a serial novel. There were 10 of us. We each wrote one chapter of the same story. So without talking about what the story was going to be. So it's not an anthology where you've got different stories about different things. It's a single cohesive story, but written by different people without talking about what the story is going to be about.
Who started it?
I did.
Okay.
I got the concept from Agatha Christie. She used to do this with her mystery writers way back in the 40s. And I always thought that was interesting. I was fascinated by that concept. And I wanted to do the first version with all black writers. And so I reached out to writers I was familiar with and other writers that I wanted to be familiar with, that I wanted to get to know, and I invited them to be a part of this project. And we just did it sequentially. I wrote chapter 1, and then I would give it to you. You would read my chapter 1 and write chapter 2, and then we take those 2 chapters without discussion and give them to a third writer. They'd read the first 2 chapters and write chapter 3.
And you came up with a coordinated effort, a book that really had some sequential.
Yes, you know, I
That's
expected
interesting.
it to be a love story. I wrote chapter 1 about a boy and a girl who had just met at a party and now they're on the phone. And so I expected it to be a love story between these 2. What ended up happening is it ended up being a coming of age story about that black man and him trying to make himself a better person through his relationships with women, which I thought was interesting because you don't see coming of age stories for men, especially black men, that often. You often see coming of age stories for women. So I thought that was interesting, especially considering there were only 3 male writers in our collective of 10 people. So it was mostly women.
Really?
Right.
Okay, so women and men.
Right.
Okay, I thought
Yeah,
it
it
was
was
all
actually
men.
7 women and 3 men,
Wow.
including myself.
And did each of their perspectives, did you think a woman wrote that versus a man wrote that?
Not at all.
Could you tell?
Matter of fact, in some of the interviews for that book, people asked me if I wrote the whole thing myself and I was just coming up with the PR scheme. but no, each of the writers had their own take on what was happening and took it in directions that I couldn't even begin to predict.
That's really
Every time it came
interesting.
back to me, it was a surprise.
Very interesting. So your next fiction book was called The Sound of Silk at Midnight. That sounds like another romantic story. Tell us about that.
So the publisher for my first book, When Butterflies Kiss, classified that book as erotica, even though it wasn't really. And because of that classification, I got invited to write erotica. I wasn't so interested in writing erotica. That's not really where my creativity lies. So what I tried to do was explore the thin space between erotica and sensuality and write about what happens more in one's head than what happens in one's bed. Right? So I had some success with that. I was published in a number of anthologies, but typically my stories were overshadowed by the stories that were a little more ribald, a little more sexual. And so I decided to take my stories and collect them in my own anthology and add some new stories to it so that you could have a separate book that kind of explores the quieter side of eroticism.
And then you went on to write a nonfiction called Stories of Survival and Beyond. And these are stories about the people who left and came back to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I worked with a nonprofit that's based in New Orleans, and they were working with these people who had survived Hurricane Katrina and had decided to move back to New Orleans to help rebuild the city, as opposed to many of the people who moved away and never came back. And that was one of the most challenging writing assignments I've ever worked on, because these are first-person accounts from people who survived, and you know it's horrible. You know, we know from reading the papers and watching the news that it was horrible, but when you hear someone talk about what they specifically experienced, it makes it that much more palatable. You know, it makes it that much more powerful. And I had to take a lot of breaks. Just for example, there was a woman who said that she and her family always would go away for 3 days whenever there was a hurricane. Hurricane Katrina was not the first hurricane in New Orleans. So their process was pack for 3 days, go away, come back. So they did that this time, but then they couldn't return home for 7 months. And so what do you do when you're only packed for 3 days? You don't have enough clothes for 3 days, and your job is washed away, and your bank is washed away. You don't have access to funds, and you've got to buy new clothes. And how do you survive? And so it was really a challenging piece, and I'm very proud of that work. And we did a book signing in New Orleans, and I got to meet the people who I was writing about, and it was very fulfilling.
And that is why you said this was one of the most emotional projects you've ever worked on, because you were face to face with the people that you were writing about, because they were telling their stories.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. They were giving their first-person accounts and talking about everything they experienced as opposed to writing it. I should mention that. So I was working with transcripts. You know, these are people talking about their experiences, and I had to kind of organize that in a cohesive way. And it was really challenging. It was really challenging.
One thing I like about your background is you've been involved in a lot of things. Stage work. You co-authored and co-starred in a 3-man spoken word theater performance. What was that like, and how did you bring these people into that space?
Yeah, I fell into it. That seems to be a
into
running
it,
theme
right?
with me, right? I fell into it. I was in a kind of a men's group. We met and talked about our feelings, what was going on with us. And one of the guys found out I was a writer. He shared with me one of his poems, and it really struck a chord with me. And so I wrote a response poem. And unbeknownst to me, he had shared it with another man in that group who also wrote a response poem. So we ended up with these 3 poems about our interaction with the N-word. And our 3 perspectives were very different. And so we decided to perform those 3 poems together. That's it. Just, we're going to do a spoken word event. Actually, it was part of another spoken word event, a larger spoken word event. And we're going to perform those 3 poems back to back to back. And people were blown away, and we were blown away by the response. And then we realized we've got something here. This is an actual show. And so we kept writing more and more pieces from our own perspective about race, about quote unquote post-racial America, about what it's like to be a black man in America. And then we put those things together into a spoken word performance. And then it was accepted into the Fringe Festival, which is a theater festival here in New York. And it became a play. And then we had a sold-out run at Cherry Lane Theater, which is a very prestigious theater in Soho, and it really took on a life of its own. It was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my creative life, because it wasn't just about the creativity; it's also about race and the black male reality in America.
Speaking of black race and black men, you also got involved in something called Black Men on Black Love, where you brought together men to talk about relationships and to discover what a relationship is like. What was that like? When did you do it, and how did it work out?
Yeah, so during my book tour for When Butterflies Kiss, I was invited to be on a panel at the Congressional Black Caucus with some luminaries of writing. I was on a panel with Liana Van Zant, for example, and Omar Tari, and a few other really big authors. And we were tasked with talking about relationships, but we were also invited to create some drama between us because it was a live broadcast, live radio broadcast, and they were trying to boost ratings. So because of that, the conversation was a little more dramatic than it needed to be, and I noticed that people in the audience were really searching for something with a little more weight, a little more gravitas, if you will. So afterwards, a few people approached me and they thanked me for my kind of even comments, right? And so I realized that there was something there, and I decided to come back to New York and create just a one-off event to give people the opportunity to really talk about these questions, ask these questions, and talk about their relationship concerns. And it was really popular. It happened at Aaron Davis Hall, and there was a huge turnout, and people really wanted more. And so it became a monthly event because of demand. And so I kept it going for a while, and it turned into a column that I wrote for a couple of different websites. And it then turned into a second column, and it kind of just developed a life of its own. And as a matter of fact, there was a black male psychologist I was invited to be on that panel who just hit me up a couple weeks ago to say, we need to bring it back. We need to do it again. Okay. So we're trying to figure out what the new iteration of Black Men on Black Love will look like.
Oh, that sounds terrific. Yeah. I want to keep in contact to find out what's going on, too.
Great.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Great.
Okay? Sekou, also I know you're doing a lot of work in the automotive space under the umbrella of Simply Rise. A lot of things. I want to hear how you got started with Simply Rise and what influenced you to start doing this. And then, yeah, tell us how you got started with that.
Okay, so it'll probably come as no surprise to you that I fell into it. I was working, as I mentioned earlier, at Uptown Magazine. We decided we wanted a car section, but it's a lifestyle magazine. So it's not Car and Driver or Road and Track, it's a lifestyle magazine. So we wanted to have a lifestyle feel for the automotive section. We started off by editing someone else's writing. They were submitting car stories and I was editing them. And at some point, to lower the budget, we started doing it in-house and I started writing it. And so I was writing it without the typical car stuff, so without 0 to 60, torque, RPM, double wishbone suspension. I left all that stuff out and just talked about the aesthetics, the features, how the car might fit into your lifestyle. And I found at Uptown events, because Uptown had a lot of events at the time, that people, especially women, were finding me and saying, hey, I read your car story. And it perplexed me so much because, hey, I wrote the cover story about Terrence Howard. You didn't read that? Like, why is the car story so interesting? It was a little short blurb, too. And I realized that there was something there. There was something in the way that I was writing about cars that was appealing to women specifically, but also to people who are interested in cars but aren't interested in what's under the hood, just more interested in how it fits into their life. So eventually I left Uptown and I started Simply Rides, and I've been writing about automotive content ever since.
One of the things that I loved a lot, I got on your site and I looked up Mommy's on the Move.
Yes.
Mommy's on the Move, and the sisters are doing it.
Yeah.
Tell us about Mommy's on the Move.
So I'm glad you asked about that. That's my favorite project to date. And it really encapsulates what I was just saying, that women are often ignored in the automotive space, even though women are either the buyers or they're influencing the buyers. Like, so I think the statistic is 80% of car purchases are influenced by women.
Wow.
So really, it should, all the advertising should be all about women, right? They should be trying to reach out to the women who are influencing the car buyers. And even when men are single, they're buying cars typically that will impress a woman, or they think will impress a woman, right? So it was interesting to explore that. And what I did with Mommy on the Move was invite 4 or 5 really dynamic multicultural moms to test drive what was then the new Kia Sorento, which is their SUV, and to talk about their lives and how they balance mommyhood with their very busy careers while test driving the car. So the car became part of the interview, but it wasn't the main thing. The main thing was, I'm a busy mom and I've got a really dope career, and this is how I balance my work life and my home life. And oh, by the way, I'm in this car that's really interesting, and you know, they might notice different features as we were driving. So I was really excited about that project. I did it in association with Kia. They underwrote it, and it's gotten some really good critical reviews.
Yeah, I love
and I
it.
would really love to turn it into an actual TV show. That's my next goal. A lot of dope moms have reached out to me since season 1 and asked me to be part of season 2.
And they're called dope moms?
Well, I'm calling them dope moms. They're super fly moms.
Okay.
Right? So really busy moms.
Busy moms,
Busy
right.
moms.
Yes.
So a lot of other moms have reached out to say, how can I be a part of season 2? And I'm hoping to make that happen.
Because they all looked busy. They looked like they were going somewhere with the purpose.
Absolutely.
And that's what I loved about it. Now, you recently did 2 things that I really want to talk about, and I don't know how long it will take us to talk about it, but tell me about the story of your test driving the Lexus from Nashville to New York City.
Right.
I want to hear about this.
Yeah. So I'll try to make it quick. I actually drove a Lexus 2-seat sports car down to Nashville from New York, and then I drove the Lexus RX 450 hybrid, which is their hybrid SUV, from Nashville back up to New York. I especially want to talk about that return leg, because I was halfway through Virginia when I started thinking, the car feels like it's steering itself, but that can't be true.
Wow.
It can't be steering itself. I must be sleepy, right? So I wait for a straightaway and I take my hands off the wheel, and sure enough, the car is steering itself. Blew me away, blew me away. So, you know, there's all this talk about the advent of self-driving cars and autonomous cars, and we're not there yet, so they say, but the technology exists. It's just getting better. So what I discovered is that in the Lexus 450, it was a sequence, a combination of features. So it was adaptive cruise control. I had that engaged. So that meant that it was keeping a distance from the car in front of me. So the cruise control is set for 65, the speed limit, right? But if the car in front of me would slow to a stop, my car would slow to a stop. All the way to a stop, all by itself, because of it is reading the radar distance to the bumper in front of me. And also, it was reading the lines on either side of the car. So not only was it regulating start and stop, it's regulating left and right. So I had planned to spend the night halfway somewhere and rest up for the drive, but the car was doing all the work.
Wow.
So I made the whole thing in one shot. It was about 14 hours.
But with that being your first time trying that, was it frightful, or was it, did you think of, oh my God, this thing could take over, but you know, and I can't control it.
So it's funny you asked that, because theoretically I thought I wouldn't like it, because I'd heard about this before from some other car journalist friends. I thought I wouldn't like it, but I didn't know that it was in this car, and I just happened to discover it, and I loved it, and it made my driving fatigue so much less, and I was able to travel so much further and still feel refreshed when I got there, because essentially the car was doing the bulk of the work. Now I still had to babysit it. I don't want anybody watching at home to go out there and just set the car on cruise control and think you can just walk away.
Right.
Like, you still have to keep your hands on the wheel.
Yes.
You have to pay attention to what's going on. Sometimes there are breaks in the lines that may throw the car off. So you still have to pay attention, but it greatly reduced the driver's fatigue for me.
Okay. What I want to do is go and talk a little bit about Bad Boy Brown. I know you were in Nashville at one point test driving again, and you and your friend were accosted by the police there. And that event triggered something that enabled you to go and do all kinds of other things like documentaries, and you told stories. Tell us the story about that incident in Nashville with the police or with the white man.
So this happened not long after the verdicts came down for Mike Brown and Eric Garner. And like a lot of people, I was upset by the verdicts. I had already done Mommy on the Move, which was about black women driving these cars, and I wanted to do black men at first just to show intelligent, articulate black men, period. I felt like that was a media image that needed to be out there, that people out there in the world needed to see black men being smart. My second decision was to ask my first interviewee to wear a hoodie in silent homage to Trayvon Martin. And we weren't going to talk about it. We were just going to have him wear this hoodie. He actually did not own a hoodie. We had to go to Walmart the day of the shoot and buy one, because he's a three-piece suit, bow tie, pocket square kind of guy, very well dressed. So anyway, we did that, and a few minutes into us taking pictures of him standing next to the vehicle, before we even started the shoot per se, we were accosted by these two white men who were not police officers, who had no position of authority. They just didn't like, I guess, the optics of these two black men, one of whom was in a hoodie, in this vacant lot. And they came to challenge us about where we were and why we were there and what we were doing. We were fairly defensive, and the conversation did not go well, if you want to call it a conversation. But then one of them started reaching under his sweatshirt as if he had a gun. And so that took things to a different place. Like, now we're in self-preservation mode. None of it makes sense, right? But we're trying to live to tell the tale. It got worse before it got better, because then once we calmed down and they calmed down, then they started trying to sell us things that were stereotypically black, like barbecue ribs, pork chops, a car with rims on it, a car with tinted windows, like all these things that were very stereotypically black. We had no interest in.
Don't look like you, right?
Right. I mean, are you looking at us? Do you see who we are? So that was very challenging. And so I'm making a long story long, but when they finally left, we couldn't do what we set out to do, which was talk about the car, because we were too upset.
Yes.
So I asked him on camera to tell me about what just happened. And he went off. He talked about race-based assumption and white people in positions of authority. And he's a father of a black male. And so ultimately we talked about what this makes him think about as the father of a black male child, what his son might have to deal with. And the fact that he needs to have conversations with his son about race, even though his son at the time was, I think, only 8 or 9. So very early in life. And he related the story that I'll relate to you. He said that when he made a decision to talk to his son about race, his son told him that he was already being impacted by it. And so that blew my friend away. He hadn't considered the fact that he was already being impacted at that early age. And his son told him that he had a substitute teacher, a white female substitute teacher, that kept trying to silence him when he was trying to answer questions for the class. And it wasn't until after the class that the white substitute teacher said to him, "You're not who I thought you were." And the child was not able to put that in context until he was having the conversation with his father about race and about the perception of a black man, period, and a black man who isn't well dressed, secondarily. And then he's a bright kid. He was able to put that all together and say, oh, that's what was happening. I was wearing a hoodie and I was wearing sweats, and she thought I was somebody else. She thought I was trying to create trouble instead of trying to answer questions.
Right.
So that is what became Brown Boy Bad.
Now, you did a documentary about this as well?
So I turned what we're talking about now, into a documentary. So a docu-series. I turned my interview with that black father into 2 episodes. And I brought one of them to a couple different film festivals. Well, I should rephrase that. It was accepted to a few different film festivals, which was, very exciting. And I've done some interviews since then. And my goal is to create a single documentary that kind of addresses some of these issues about race-based assumption and kind of size-based assumption for black men. Both of the black men I interviewed so far are large black men, but they're also really smart. And they're also very, very well educated and contributors to society. And so all these things that you don't necessarily assume when you see a big black man in a hoodie.
So let's take a look at the jewelry side of your life, because we have just 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Let's take a look at the jewelry side. Rocks by Sekou. Tell us what kind of jewelry you make and some of the social causes.
Sure. So I started this because I was trying to raise money for Brown Boy Bad, which we just talked about. And I hired someone to make bracelets, and that ended up being cost prohibitive. So I started looking at YouTube videos literally to figure out how to make bracelets myself. I made one for me, and I put it on social media, and people started asking me to make bracelets for them. And I kept saying, no, that's not what I do. I'm a writer. But people kept asking, and so I ultimately relented and started making bracelets, and thus Rocks by Sekou was born. And as you mentioned, I work with a lot of different nonprofits because that was the genesis. I started doing it to raise money for Brown Boy Bad, which I hope will become my nonprofit soon. And so I work with a lot of different nonprofits to help them raise money and help them raise awareness. Matter of fact, this is a good segue. Here's one for you.
Oh,
Your
wow.
Delta bracelet that you asked me for.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Take a look.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
And,
I love it.
And I found out that Delta has a fund that they created. And so I gave 10% of your purchase price to that fund.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So what else is on the radar?
What else? More test drives. Again, I'd like to turn Brown Boy Bad into a documentary and into a nonprofit. I hope to bring Black Men on Black Love back in some new form. And more bracelets, working with more and more nonprofits trying to raise money and awareness.
Great. Well, you know what? At some point down the road, you're not going to talk again. It was great having you here today. Tell people how they can reach out to you.
Well, again, thanks for having me. My name is Sekou Writes, and you can find me online at SekouWrites.com. All the other things I do are spun off from that one website. So I won't give you a bunch of websites to remember, just Sekou Writes, WRITES.com.
Thank you so much. We will see you the next time on Everyday Conversations with Velma and Arliss. Goodbye.